I'm Fitz Koehler, and welcome to the Fitzness Show. So today I have an incredible guest who, for those of my friends who are obsessed with the endurance industry, are going to be very, very excited about. If you are not already obsessed with the endurance industry, well then pay attention anyways, because this guy is just a great conversationalist. He's someone that I would love to have come over and just sit on my couch and chat for hours, but he lives in Colorado and I'm in Florida, so oh, well, we're going to have to talk via live stream, but it's Troy Busot, and he is the founder of Athlinks. So Athlinks is the hub for all race results of all sorts, and you might find your name there. You could definitely find my name there if you want to see how slow I go. But until then, I'm going to bring him on right now. Welcome, Mr. Troy.
How's it going?
I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we met a handful of months ago when you had me on your podcast, the Athlinks podcast.
Indeed. And
yeah.
You're a wonderful guest and also a great conversationalist.
Yeah, I felt like I was very sad when the interview was over. So since then, I've been thinking, how do we get Troy on my show? And then I thought, well, I just ask.
Well, it is an honor to be here. And yeah, all you needed to do was ask.
I'm so glad you are. And I also would like to mention that when I asked you for a few photos for promo for this segment, you sent me awesome photos, very muscly, very good photos. And I thought, well, this will bring in some fans because they were man candy photos.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. That wasn't the intention. I think there was a triathlon photo in there where I'd just gotten out of the water. So I probably had the pump going a little bit.
Yeah, you did. It's the man candy. I don't know if anyone's ever referred to you as man candy since you're
maybe behind my back. I don't know.
You're welcome. So before we go further, I thought I would let you tell folks in a little more eloquent way about Athlinks and what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, I actually just left Athlinks, but I'm still a fan of the business and Lifetime Fitness, whom I sold that to about 8 years ago. So the premise of Athlinks is it's all about all your results in one place. The mission has always been to get more people racing more often, having more fun in the process. And part of that was to basically aggregate the world's race results. So the week I left, in fact, we hit 350 million race results all in one database. So you just go there, you type in your name, you will find all of your results. If not, maybe if you raced, in some very small, obscure races in other parts of the world where there were no members also running that race, but you can add that race and our team will go in and add those results right away. So 350 million results, you should have all of your results in one place and you just claim them. You have profiles and then you can connect with other athletes and do things around those things. So that's the gist. And again, I sold it to Lifetime about 8 years ago. And so now it's part of ChronoTrack, and so the registration, the scoring, the timing, all of that under one roof. So that's Athlinks.
And how long ago did you create it, and what inspired that?
I created it 15 years ago, and it was originally called Virtue Race, and it was something very different. And the interesting thing is I've interviewed a couple of FKT, so the king and queen of FKTs, Jason Hardrath and Ashley. FKT is fastest known times. And the idea of a fastest known time is you have a known course in the world. So it could be something, it's bigger than a Strava segment typically. So it's, it could be the 10K course in Central Park. It could be Mount Everest. So it's anything where, it's accessible and there is a public route or course, and then people go and compete individually to go enter their time on fastestknowntimes.com, I think it is. And so that's really what Virtue Race originally started out to be, but this was again 15 years ago before smartphones and GPS was really widespread. And I created it just because I used to do things like climb Camelback Mountain and South Mountain and things in Phoenix, and I was just always curious about how fast I was or how good I was versus everybody else. So I created this service and I climbed Camelback Mountain every day for 30 days. And I handed out these little activation cards. And I just said, hey, if you want to know like what your time was compared to other people, go home and enter your time. And I think in 30 days, I had 2 people do it. It was just a total abject failure It was just, and I was so convinced this was going to be like amazing.
Right.
And after 30 days, it was just, nobody gave a shit. It was just like, nobody cared. So I was on my way home, and there was a triathlon going on in Tempe Town Lake. And I was literally talking to a buddy of mine whom I had started a previous business with, just totally dejected, like, man, I don't know how to make this thing work. I don't know what I'm missing. And so I was always fascinated in triathlon. So I stopped and I watched the race, and then I started talking to a handful of the finishers and just kind of asked them, like, how do you get your race results? What's the world like? Because I had never done a race before. I think I'd done a turkey trot before with my uncle, but not because I was an endurance athlete, just because it was like a Thanksgiving morning thing, biggest race day of the year in the US. And these guys were all just like, we don't know how to get our results. And it was funny because it was an ITU race. So everybody that I was talking to was from out of state. And so they weren't even sure what the name of the race was even. So they told me a very bleak picture, which was helpful in my mind because I could tell that there was a problem here. And so I was working out of this coffee shop at the time. And I worked all week to sort of reverse the process of, instead of individuals adding their results, I would just upload a set of results. I went to a race the next weekend and handed out these cards, the same cards that I was using on top of Camelback. And I think like 50 people signed up that first day. And so I could tell, okay, there's a real issue here. And then I created a little form on the site that said, like, add a race if you're, so people could add a link to a set of results. And it was just supposed to be in Phoenix. That was kind of the idea. It was like a side gig. I was working somewhere else at the time. And then it was, somebody requested LA Marathon, and then, like New York City Marathon, all these big races from all around the world and stuff. And so, I started getting other people involved, and we just started crowdsourcing the ingestion of these results. And, we hit 1 million pretty quickly. And again, as I said, 15 years later, we sit at 350 million. We add in a normal time, about 3 million results a month. Right now with COVID still lingering, it's 500,000 or so, as races come back. But yeah.
Oh, so you're kind of the Forbes Gates of endurance races. I mean, you're the tech guy who had this passion. And then I like that you failed first. I like that 2 people were like, only people signed up and you were undeterred. What kind of manpower does it take we'll use LA Marathon because I'm familiar with that. We get about 25,000 athletes from the marathon alone. They send you the results. What kind of manpower does it take to make sure all of that turns out and looks pretty?
So it's interesting. The thing that I did that turned out to be a happy accident, I wrote some software that would parse results and sort of automate that process. And the problem is there's so many different scoring engines and so many different ways of presenting results. There was always this opportunity to miss a result, and then you wouldn't know it until later and somebody complained. And so what I ended up doing was just creating this small team of people who would verify all this stuff. So we never employed a quote unquote scraper. We never used software to pull the results. We always have a human, unless it's an API. So scoring engines can now later, years later, now we have a lot of our results just get pushed in directly from an API from a scoring engine. So it doesn't take a lot of people. It just took some, decent software that allowed, again, a team to grab those results, paste them into a form, define all the columns, and submit it up, and then be able to audit those results. And so every set of results we have in the system has been audited by a person to make sure that they are accurate.
Well, it's impressive with great accuracy and speed that you get those results up. It's mind-boggling to someone like me that's only moderately tech savvy. I feel like it's like a fax machine. I still don't understand it. I put it in the fax machine and then it ends up coming out on the other side. But
yeah, dude. Yeah.
You manage millions of numbers and names, and it almost always looks the way it's supposed to look. So besides your tech savvy, you're an endurance athlete. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I came to that sort of by accident. And I think I had a typical background of just kind of, the group sports. I played football and I wrestled and I played baseball growing up. Again, I did a turkey trot, but I always loved running. and but I was more of like a sprinter, again, that football, baseball type of thing. And then running for wrestling was always about losing weight. And so, but I loved it. And I took my brother's hybrid mountain bike to a bike shop one time and said, "Hey, I want to do a try. Like, what do I have to do to this bike?" And the guy literally just like laughed me out of the shop. He didn't even want to talk to me about it. And so I put that on the back burner. But like all of us, I had seen all those Ironman, NBC specials and stuff, and I was fascinated by it. But I kind of looked at myself and said, I'm not that kind of, I just assumed everybody doing triathlon had run cross country and been on the swim team and were these uber endurance athletes from day one. And so I was just really intimidated by that whole thing. And that day when I went down and sort of got this new idea from VirtuRace to rename it to Athlinks and do a results repository, I just saw who was crossing the finish lines in that race. And I realized, yes, there were certainly the uber endurance athletes, but there was a whole lot of other people that were not. And so I just started, as I was starting Athlinks, I just started training for triathlon. I wasn't really interested in running like 5Ks and things. I was really like, I wanted to get into triathlon. I was just totally fascinated and hooked by it. So yeah, that's how I started.
And so that's just what I love, that you also just like me, I thought, I don't want to do that. That looks really hard. And then all of a sudden I fell into a race and I kind of fell in love with the race. And then I looked around and I thought, oh, these are really regular people. I always akin runners or people who do my races to anyone you'd see at Walmart at 3 o'clock in the morning. Just around, it's those people, and those people show up at the start of major marathons, local 5Ks. It's everybody, right?
Yeah. And that was, one of the pursuits, again, like I really was committed and have always been committed to this idea of more people racing more often, having more fun in the process. I say it incessantly because I can totally relate. I was a good athlete. I was always the fastest kid in my school or grade or whatever, strong for my size, all of these things. And I felt totally outside endurance sports. I did not feel like that was attainable to me. And so I totally relate to the people who are, never done anything and can't, walk and chew gum at the same time, thinking I can't do it.
Yeah.
Totally can do it. I mean, I get passed by people who, it's like, where the hell do you come from? Like, all the time. It was funny. I was in a race a couple of years ago. It was a 5K and it was just at my kid's school. And, like we all do, I'm sizing everybody up, at the start line. And there's a guy next to me who's being kind of like a little elbowy, trying to get in front, and I'm like, okay, well, this guy, and he probably had 40 pounds on me, kind of, my age, like middle-aged and kind of had a little pot belly on him. Like, I'm going to dust this guy. This guy kicked my ass. I mean, he flew. I tried to stay with him and I was like, man, I don't know. If we had been on bikes, I would have sworn he was on an e-bike. He just flew. So, I love that lesson around endurance, is that, you just cannot judge a book by its cover. And we are all capable of, because a lot of it is just, a lot of it is the physical side, but so much of endurance is about mental toughness.
Yeah, it's a good combination of them both. And I too have been passed by people that have given me the gut check. My first real devastating pass came by a very older man in his 80s wearing a King Triton outfit at Disney, and he had the long wig. He wore the whole wig for the whole marathon. And I also got passed by a man dressed completely head to toe as Chewbacca at the end of the marathon. And I thought, oh, what the heck? But good for them.
I love it. I mean, that one of the things that I do love about endurance sports is the relative nature of all of it. The first time you run a 5K, you're thinking 3 miles, like who can run 3 miles as hard as you can go? And then, years later, you're in a 100-mile race or whatever, And so now it's interesting when I go places and I look at mountains in the distance and think I could run there, I could ride my bike there, that type of thing. And like everything just grows and grows and grows, et cetera. So it's, I don't know. I love that side of it, is that you constantly push the boundaries of what's possible, where in those other sports, you get better, but wrestling is wrestling, football is football. It's always the same thing.
Right.
You get better at it, but you can't all of a sudden, like just change the sort of the physics of the sport itself, where
Yeah.
running and cycling and things you can.
And I think that, well, I don't think, I know that translates outside of the sport. So all the things you thought you couldn't do in your normal life too, whether it's business or personal, etc.
Yeah.
It's okay to start taking chances and pushing those boundaries. So I want to remind everyone that you're more than welcome to join in the conversation. If you have any questions for Troy, any comments, you just want to recognize the hairstyle that I worked very hard on today. Troy,
Love it.
I know.
Very cool. I would do that to mine if I could.
It's very exciting to have hair, for starters, and it's technically a mullet. So anyways,
Indeed.
the braids are a big deal right now. So
I dig it.
tell me that you're a triathlon at heart, a triathlete at heart, but you mentioned that you're going to do a 50 miler at Leadville.
Yeah, I haven't done a tri in a few years. Once I moved to Colorado, it kind of ended that. I don't enjoy cold water swimming and not at 5,000 feet. So I'm gonna, had it not been for COVID, there's I think it's in Beaver Creek in Xterra that I'd love to do. I'd love to do a off-road tri, because I've gotten far more into trail running and mountain biking since moving to Colorado 6 years ago. So I've got a 50-mile run in Leadville. It's called Silver Rush. It's part of the Lifetime Race Series. I've paced at the 100 a couple of times, and then I have Randy. I am in Broomfield, Colorado. I've paced at the 100, and then I've run the heavy half a couple of times. And there's something unbelievably magical about Leadville, Colorado, and running up there. It's just, it's awesome. So yeah, I'm excited. I've been dealing with some leg issues that I'm hoping I've got sorted out here, but races in July and be my first 50.
And so, I mean, the top of Leadville is a very small kind of place. I've been there. It's a little strange. Apparently none of the fruit is ever perfectly right. For some reason, is it rotten up there? It doesn't grow. It's the transportation time. Leadville's a little unique, but is most of the race just on the top of Leadville? Are you going down and up?
You go from Main Street. So you started at 10,000, call it 10,000 feet, and then you go up into the mountains. So I think Silver Rush, I know the heavy half tops out on top of Mosquito at 13,300 or 13,500, somewhere around there. I don't know if Silver Rush goes quite as high. I don't remember, but yeah, regardless. So you're at 10,000, you're going up above tree line into the 12, 13,000 range.
So 10,000 plus, no mercy.
10,000 plus, no mercy. Yeah. And luckily so far, again, knock on wood, I've never had a problem with altitude sickness or anything up there, and Mosquito, which is not part of Silver Rush, but it's like, I mean, it's just straight up. You're if you can run it, you're truly elite. So you're doing a lot of kind of walking and hoofing, but yeah, but there's once you're up above that tree line, and it's like one of the bald guys, it's like you have hair with trees, and then all of a sudden, just at a certain elevation, it just cuts off completely. And then so you're up 13,500 feet, and you're looking across the valley at Mount Massive and the other 14ers, and you've got Turquoise Lake below you. I mean, it is just, I don't know. It's just gorgeous. It's beautiful.
It's worth the effort.
It is definitely worth the effort. Yeah, for sure.
So we talked about the good, bad, and ugly in endurance racing. So I know you've heard it all, you've seen it all, you've experienced a lot about that. So let's get into that. The best things you've seen in endurance racing.
Well, I think at every single finish line, you definitely see the best of humans in endurance racing, and the constant challenge, the things that you see, like if you're feeling low, if you just need to pick me up, go to a race and stand at a finish line, and you get, this is your job on a weekly basis, right?
It's almost rude to call it a job. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it is just unbelievable. So the easy answer is just simply watching finish lines. And that is the thing that over the last year and a half that I've just missed so desperately, is not it's less about the competition, because I can still run and ride outside, but it's just that there is just something, we call it the reignition moment at Athlinks. And it's that idea that from the moment that gun goes off, you're immediately saying, I freaking hate this. I want to die. I want to stop. I'm done. Why did I do this? Why do I keep doing this to myself? I hate it. And then you cross that finish line and you're like, when's my next race?
Mhm.
You know, it's just that, I don't know, it's just so addictive to be able to go through that process. And so I do love that side of things, and just the, the sportsmanship, watching people like help each other on course. I just think racing absolutely brings out the best in people, which is so funny, which I know we're going to talk about. But when you get like the cheating aspects and you get the people who are for no good reason, not that there's ever a good reason to cheat, but just for no good reason, are out there on a course and decide to cut the course or cheat in some other ways. And
Totally missing the point there. Totally missing the point.
yeah, I mean, there was a great story, and Athlinks was heavily involved in this. It was a guy, Kip Litton, and there's a whole long thread on Let's Run from years ago. This guy, Kip Litton, created fake. So he not only cheated in races, he created fake websites for events, then created fake results, putting himself as the winner of these races, and then contacted Athlinks and said, hey, add this race, add this race. So we had a full set of fake results for this guy. And then so everybody was sort of coming to us saying like, hey, why are you guys doing this? Like, well, I mean, we had 50,000 events a year, 30 million results a year. Like we don't verify that every single event actually happened. It sure looked legit, but this guy literally went through all of that pain and trouble just to create fake results for himself.
And to what ends? Like what happened?
No idea.
Yeah.
There was no end. It was like online bragging rights. And this was at least 8 years ago. So this was probably 10 years ago. So he wasn't making money as an influencer. There was no, that didn't exist back then. And so nobody ever really knew his motivation other than just sort of bragging on Facebook that he had done these things. But he wasn't, as far as we could tell, he wasn't monetizing. I don't believe he was a sponsored athlete. And it wasn't like he was putting like, elite world-class times that would have gotten him some appreciable thing. It was literally just, I don't know, just to brag in his lunchroom at work that he took second place in some 10K somewhere. It was bizarre.
Well, just so you know, I won the world championship dance competition in my kitchen this morning. So
cool.
I'll be submitting
Congratulations.
That. We can have our own little world championship single day, right?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. Like I think I took second in a race one time, and it was a 5K. And I think my 5K time was like 20 minutes and 10 seconds or something. And it's so embarrassing to me that was like a second overall finish. That is not a good 5K time. And so it's just like, you want to put those little asterisks, like this was a really small race, guys.
Okay. So I'm going to compete with that thought right there, because I did a 5K in Catalina a few years ago, and it was kind of small, a few hundred people. But it was a very steep start, and you had to go up the mountain, and I did lots of power walking, but I got up to the top and I thought, oh, running fast. This feels good. And I remember being at the start, looking around, seeing women and thinking, there's not a lot of people my age here. Right. And I had kind of started at the front, not too many people passed me. And then when I started going down, I started thinking, I might win an age group award. And so I did actually pass someone, and I thought it was going to be in a cartoon, where they run and then they fall and they turn into a snowball.
Yeah.
That's how Floridians feel on a mountain, but really hard. And Rudy, my cohort, was announcing that race. And during the age group awards, I was sitting there thinking, oh, please, please. And there came the silver medal. And he was like, no, it was so painful for him. And chariots of fire ran up to that. I mean, I think any age group award, even if there's only like, you're the only person in your age group.
Yeah.
That was probably one of my proudest moments of the decade.
That's hilarious.
Sad,
yeah.
But yeah. Own that, Troy. Tiny race, right. Second place. Own it.
All right. I'll own it.
You could feel victorious about that. All right. So going back to the best in our endurance industry.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this is the best, but this is something that I'd love to see. And you're starting to see it with these sort of socially distanced races, the unpaved, which is a big gravel race in Pennsylvania, they switched there. So it's normally like, I think, 1,000-person race, and they went to 200 people this past year. And what they did was, it's a 126-mile race, if I'm not mistaken. Dave Pryor, the race director, decided along with his staff to basically employ Enduro, which they call Grinduro rules. So what that means is, instead of timing the whole 126-mile segment of the entire race, they put 3 time segments on course. And this allowed people to not have to rush through aid stations. And so you could sort of filter a few people at a time through the aid stations and things like that. And so what ended up happening, so basically the idea in an enduro or grinduro race is, you're basically on a leisure ride until you get to these clearly marked time segments, and then you and whomever is riding with you, you turn yourselves inside out trying to get through that time segment. And it could be a 20-mile time segment, it could be a 2-mile time segment, depends on the terrain and that type of thing. And so there's all sorts of applications that I'd love to see as people come back to racing. As you and I talked about kind of offline, I see 80-90% of the people in Boulder running and riding with masks, and it drives me nuts. But on the business side of things, I think, well, what do we have to do to get those people back into a race? Because that is not a person who's going to be racing anytime soon, right? And so you have to start thinking, like, how do we adapt courses and the race day atmosphere around those people to get them back out into racing? And I think that that's a really interesting way to look at it. Is, think about New York City Marathon, where you have 60,000 people, and maybe 10,000 of those people really care about a PR and want to turn themselves inside out for that entire 26.2 miles. But there's probably a whole lot of other people who would be just as happy to run, 6-mile segments, have a meal or some sort of experience or something, like there's a concert, something along those lines, where you can now kind of break this race into timed segments, instead of just, laying it all out. So I think that there's some really interesting ways of looking at racing going forward. Because back in, I don't know, 05 to probably 2012, you had so much innovation. It's when Spartan was born. It's when Color Run was born. It's when, Xterra was born. You had all of these different styles of races coming. And it feels like we started taking ourselves very, very seriously as an industry. We stopped innovating. So I think it's really interesting to think about some of the ways, because the reality is we've been laid bare. Like, this industry has been completely stripped,
Obliterated.
Obliterated.
And I am going to go off a little bit. It's so unique that us, the people that inspire millions to get fit, to be healthy, to get outdoors, all these things that are, and I can say as a highly credentialed fitness expert, these things are legitimately healthy. This is how you build an immune system.
Yeah.
How we build a strong society, how anyone, especially the government, would look and say, not you guys, bad, go stop what you're doing. And it just mind-blowing. So, we need to be creative. Perhaps, I think, is it actually a need, or is it a perceived need?
I mean, the data is fairly clear in terms of exercising outdoors. Again, it's like, I think, not to get too political or anything about any of this, is any normal situation in this regard. It's sort of like, hey, here are the risks, make your best decisions around that. And if you feel like you're at risk and you want to wear a mask at the race, and you want to do all the precautions, and you want to, like a good example is open water swimming. I never liked the scrum. I would much rather swim 20 extra yards by going wide around a buoy, because I don't want to be in the scrum. Well, same thing in races. There are ways where you can sort of distance yourself if you feel like that's what you need to do.
Right.
And a year ago, we didn't know as much as we know now. So I'm not faulting anybody's decisions back then, but now it's like, okay, there's clearly enough data at this point to know where we're at risk, where we're not at risk, and all that stuff. But let's get off of COVID, because I think I'm
Um,
going to say something really
I
stupid
know.
if I haven't already done so.
I have a really good habit of saying stupid things, so
Yeah.
I'll leave the stupid comments to me. So next up, do you have another favorite part of the endurance industry?
You know, I like one of my favorite people in endurance, and this is, I think, a good and a bad thing. One of my favorite people in this industry, the most authentic people, is Joe Disena from Spartan. And I've gotten to know Joe really well over the years.
Here.
And looking at how authentically he has built that company. And like, if you ever want to, like, I had the pleasure of, I was having a conversation with Joe outside of the Fenway Park Spartan a few years back in Boston, right? So this is his kind of backyard. And the number of people who interrupted us, like with tears in their eyes, thanking him, hugging him, wanting to get a selfie with him. Like, you talk about, like, I've never touched people the way Joe does, you know. Like, I created a product that millions of people use, but I don't, you know, I mean, I get thank yous and things like that. Joe gets people who are like, you legitimately saved my life. And I mean, it was person after person after person. And, you know, say what you want about Spartan and, you know, yeah, like, it's so funny to see the conversations online about, you know, this rule change, or why did you make this decision, or whatever. And it's just like, if you approach that with a little bit of grace and give them some grace for decisions made here and there, they're still trying to run a business. But at the core of that business, you talk about authenticity. When you talk about a guy who lives and breathes what he is selling,
Yeah.
that to me is just an amazing. Andrew Messick's a similar guy from Ironman. You know, it's like he lives that lifestyle, that world. He's just, you know, the amount of integrity that guys like that bring to the table. You know, Kimo Seymour in for Lifetime, with, you know, runs the events division. You know, he's gone like 13 times under 8 hours at Leadville. You know, he's just a passionate guy about what they're out there selling. And so I love that about the industry. Is it's a small industry. It's filled with a lot of very passionate hobbyists, I'll say.
For sure.
And it's certainly what drew me to it. And ironically, it's sort of what ultimately made me leave. Was too many of my hobbies are in the same area, you know, software, endurance sports, now podcasting, all three of those things wrapped into the exact same world. It was like I needed to distance one side of that. And after 15 years and turning 50, that's kind of, you know, that's what led me to, you know, sort of take leave of that. So
Yeah, I'm well, we're going to talk about that. We're
yeah,
going to talk about that before we're done. But, you know, the gentleman you mentioned, I agree with. And Joe specifically, I view him as the Dana White of endurance sports.
totally. Yeah.
That he's not afraid to say what needs to be said, where
Yeah.
a lot of political correctness. And Joe's like, this is my company. This is the way we roll. And I think his intentions are good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love
Speaking
Joe.
of Dana White, the kickboxer in you, did you see Rose Namajunas' nice little head kick on Saturday night?
I did. In fact, even the undercards were really impressive. Holy
That was
mackerel.
an insane night of fighting. That was, oh man. Yeah. That was a good night.
So if you want to hear, I actually applied for a press pass because it was in Jacksonville, 2 hours away. I thought, oh,
Yeah.
and they said they didn't have enough because of COVID. So I was a little bit late, but that doesn't mean I can't apply for another press pass.
Yeah. No, that was a good night of fighting. That was my head and my heart. I was 2-1. My head said the only one I got wrong in my head was Rose Namajunas. My heart wanted her to win, so I'm a huge fan of hers. But man, Wei Li is just super tough, and so I wasn't sure if Rose could pull it off, but she did.
They were very scrappy. That was it could have gone either way.
Yeah, Rose is an interesting case because it kind of goes back to what I started with, where totally unassuming. You watch any fight she's in, you know, when she beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk twice, you look at Joanna and it's like, this girl's gonna tear Rose apart. And Rose kicked her ass twice. So she's the most unassuming fighter out there.
So just a little offshoot of that, when I was fighting, I also worked within the International Sport Kickboxing Association, ISKA. I was the fitness director too. So
Mhm.
I was at a world championship match in San Jose, California. And I had the luxury of meeting all the different fighters, and I was presenting belts that night. So, Joe Schmo would win and I'd come on and I'd wrap the belt around him. So anyways, post fight, we went out in downtown San Jose. It was myself and about 10 other male fighters. And there were some flyweights and there was a couple heavyweights. Our heavyweights was a Scottish guy, Duncan Arley James, and he came out in a tartan suit. The whole thing, we were such a motley looking crew. Not one person looked like a badass. Nobody looked fierce. Nobody was threatening, even though, I was the least threatening. I was a pretty damn good fighter. These guys were world champions, every last one of them. Were walking down the street in San Jose, and a car full of guys just comes and decides to pick a fight. And they're yelling, and I just thought, oh my God, y'all better have guns, because this is going to go badly for you. This is going to go so badly for you. Stay in the car. And thankfully they did. It would not have been a good scene, other than the fact that these world champions I was with were gentlemen and were possibly above a street brawl. But yeah, careful who you pick your fights with.
Typically speaking, when you achieve that level of success in fighting, it's pretty tough to get one of these guys to fight unless really, truly provoked.
Yeah. Well, you throw Conor McGregor out, he might.
Oh, there's the Platinum Mike Perry's and people like that. Yeah, I could talk MMA all day long, but I doubt that's what people want to hear.
All right, back to you. Let's see, what's the worst part of our industry? What do you see that's just made you scratch your head?
Well, again, I think as an industry, things got very, very stale, and lack of innovation, and the roll-ups. And what I'm referring to there is, rock and roll changed hands. Iron Man got bought. Even Lifetime, when I was inside of that business and sitting in those monthly meetings, when you are a race director, an independent race director, and the way that you put money on the table is by putting on great races. You know how much money you are comfortable making and have to make, and you make those decisions to build your race in a certain way around that. Once that roll up happens, all of a sudden, you're looking at the race through the lens of a P&L, a profit and loss statement, and things just change. And I think the amount of big races that got rolled up and then changed the environment around those races. Take rock and roll as a great example. Rock and roll on its way up, you're building it to build the brand and to build this, cachet around it and to build these great experiences. And you have to grow year after year after year, because those people want to sell that for a bunch of money, which they did. Well, once it sells and now it's in the hands of, this new private equity company or, whoever buys those types of things, is now all of a sudden you're looking at that thing and you're playing not to lose. It can't go down. You've got executives now who've been handed this bag who just have to protect it, And so it's a different mindset of playing not to lose versus playing to win. And yeah.
Nobody wins afraid of losing, right?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that I really think has been a negative in our industry for the last, dozen or so years since all of these roll-ups have been happening. And so, in some ways there have been positive. I think that the one that I was most privy to was Leadville. After Lifetime bought it, they had a rough year where change is always difficult and a lot of people kind of push back, but then immediately Leadville's a better race now because Lifetime, with deeper pockets, gets to go in and do things at a bigger, better way. Right. So sometimes it works.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've also noticed, and I don't really have names to throw in, and I'm not going to, but some of these bigger companies buy a very popular, beloved local race that's wildly successful. The owners, the guy or gal who created it, invested their heart and soul, and then big money guy comes in, buys it, and then all the heart and soul is gone, and people are turned off. They're cutting a lot of budget cutting, which when you're cutting off those special things that people are showing up for, we've seen a lot of races slide and, kind of verge on failing based on those big money companies.
Well, it's interesting, there's always a lot of talk about company culture and now more than ever probably. And I look at company culture I think the easiest definition for company culture that I've ever been able to come up with is it's the relationship between the CEO or founder and the customer. Take everything else out of it. I don't give a shit if you have ping pong tables or gourmet snacks in the break room or whatever. Company culture is defined by the CEO or founder's relationship with the customers. And what I mean by that is what lengths is he willing to go or she willing to go to make sure that the customer is happy. And you know, that defines, you know, your profit margins. It defines the times you're willing to lose money because you have to make it right versus you have to make money at the expense of customers. And you know, under previous under the previous regime at Active, it was a great example. You know, you had a company that started with a lot of people who really loved endurance athletes and built this brand. It was then taken over by private equity after it was taken private, after it was public. And then, you know, Darko, who was just looking to flip it again, went and sued, you know, hundreds of races, you know, to keep them on the platform. I mean, like charity, you know, Humane Society 5Ks were getting sued to stay on the platform. And so that's what I mean by company culture and that way of thinking. And so once you go from this great local, you know, it's like part of that little town in, you know, name the state.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that leaves. And the reality is you can't keep your founders around. It's a very, very difficult thing. You have to cut loose and change that because you have to start establishing your new company culture, right? And hopefully it's the same. Hopefully you have a leader who can. What's that?
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that is really valuable to a race is that the people in charge are one of us. So in race announcing, I see a huge difference between those of us who are runners. You know, I get it. I am a runner, so I know what they're about to face. I know the hardships when they're at the start line. I feel for them when they come to the finish line. Yeah. I want to celebrate. And then on occasion, a race brings in like a local news guy who's never ran a step. And he doesn't connect because he's not one of us. And I think that's even higher from the top down. That matters too. If the CEO of whatever company is in charge is one of us, they take better care.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, next up, what's your other worst thing?
About the industry or like a bad experience?
Yeah, either or. Unless you can't find another. Then
I don't know. I mean, our industry is pretty dang, I don't know. I mean, I have thoroughly enjoyed, I can honestly say it's so cliche, but that whole cliche about, you know, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Again, I've canceled vacations because a deal fell through and literally couldn't afford to go on the vacation. You know, there have been tough times, but I would not change a single minute of the last 15 years that I had the privilege of working in this industry. Cause it's just a damn good industry with a lot of just amazing, amazing people, you know, like normal people don't wake up at 3:00 in the morning to go set up a race and time it or put it on, you know, do all of the things that are required to put on a race. And so you don't get a whole lot of prima donnas. You don't get a whole lot of entitlement. There's just a lot of it's a very blue collar sport in that regard, or blue collar industry in that regard, which I just really identify with and love. Kind of how, you know, it speaks to the sensibilities that I grew up with of hard work and that type of thing. So I've got a lot of personal like terrible race stories, but yeah.
So one of the things, as you were going on about the goodness of our industry, I think one of the worst is that how they've been treated this past year with COVID, where a runner is so furious that a race was canceled, even though the state and the local government denied it. And, you know, so many of our really good race directors and organizers are being verbally brutalized because of the situation at hand. It's
yeah. Well, I think that goes to a lot of just you know, naivete or ignorance of the athlete to how the industry works. And I don't mean that as a negative. They have no reason to really know how the industry works, but the number of sunk costs that a race director incurs before the race happens is exorbitant. So like the margins on races, it's easy to look around at a race and think, okay, well, if we all paid $80 to be here, man, how much is this race director making? You have no idea what they've already paid in, policing, closing streets, city permits, paying certain volunteers or, paid volunteers throughout the journey. And so these race directors, it's not like they just slide into race day, on a pile of money.
That's right. Maserati.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of them, very few races actually are profitable. A lot of races, again, put money on put food on the table for their race directors, but it's their personal income. Like most just aren't profitable. They just aren't. And so, that was a tough thing seeing how, God, I have so many now personal friends who are race directors and timers, and seeing them have to lay people off and make those decisions not based on, not based on like what the better thing to do. It wasn't even a choice. It was pure survival. Like I don't eat, I have to sell my house. I will be homeless if this thing doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so there was some with the stimulus money, with the PPP and all that stuff that did help a lot of people keep their staffs. But yeah, I'd feel uncomfortable calling them out by name, but there was a lot of really good, like solid people making very difficult decisions, who did a phenomenally masterful job during this whole thing that saved jobs that, it'll go unsung forever.
Right. I agree. All right. On to the weird stuff. We promise good, bad, weird, ugly. What you got?
God, weird. I don't know. That's a good question on the weird side of things. You've probably seen a lot more weird stuff just doing all of the race announcing and the people, like in their costumes and everything else that you've seen over the years. I don't, I couldn't come up with any good weird things. I mean, again, the cheating is the weirdest part, is because I just don't fundamentally understand it. But
so we discussed pre-show, as you were mentioning. We do see some people who have obviously cut the course.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say every winner of every race looks a certain way, but on occasion we get some folks that come up to the finish line. I'm thinking, they don't look like they just ran 26.2 miles. And not to generalize, but most people have a kind of look about them as they've completed a distance like that. And then are certain body types, and you think, really? You won? You beat our NCAA Division I champion right back there. So yeah, it's very interesting from our end, and bib bandits. And I'm a very proactive race announcer. So if I see someone coming through without a bib, I'll let them know, volunteers, no bib, no medal. Yeah. You're not stealing from this. Or if they're worse, on a skateboard or something, I've been known to grab people physically and remove them from the course. So
Frankie Ruiz, the race director for Miami Marathon, does a great job of checking.
Yeah.
And he, it's funny because he waits until there is a certain amount of shaming that I think you have to do, right? Like
you can do it without being vulgar or inappropriate.
And he is very appropriate about this, but he stands at the end of the end of the finish chute at Miami Marathon. And if he if you're wearing a medal and not wearing a bib, he's right on you and asks you, where's your bib? And the number of people who are sort of contrite, like, yeah, here, I didn't want it anyway, kind of things. Like, dude, come on, really? Like,
well, the best with Frankie is they have a Facebook Live set up every year now. So there's a camera on Frankie. There's a few security guys, and he's like, just yanking people from the course, and they go 26 miles. And then so many of them just scooch off with their tail between their legs, and it's just okay. It's not okay. People pay a lot of money to invest in the race, for those resources, for the snacks, the medical personnel, all this stuff, and then you're going to come and maybe steal a medal, and then maybe someone who legitimately signed up for it and earned it, maybe there's no medals left for the other guy. It's not a victimless crime.
No, and again, if something were to happen to that person, again, I've been on this side of the business side of it. If something happens to that person on course, They have, you know, there's a liability issue. There's all sorts of things. You know, you have to sign a waiver at the start of the race when you pick up your packet. You know, there are real consequences that can happen through banditing. That you know, and the bottom line is it is stealing.
It's stealing.
It is absolutely stealing. You cannot, like, there's a, you know, there's a level of morality there. Like, there's no other way to look at it. You're just, if you don't look at it that way, you're just justifying it.
That's right. That's right. So what are some of the weird things that happened to you as an athlete? Because I got to hear.
I don't know, weird, but I mean, like, I went over the handlebars at Chicago Triathlon because I'm an idiot. So I was coming off Chicago Triathlon. You actually, there's part of it where you're on the freeway. And so you come off the off ramp down into transition. So you're on a downhill, pretty good downhill coming into transition. And for those, you know, who have read Joe Friel's book, one of the techniques that you can use is you take your feet out of the shoes as you are coming in. So you start, you know, your last like half mile, you want to spin really high cadence to get the, you know, your legs loosened up a little bit. And then at some point you pull that's why like triathlon shoes have little loops on the back. And so you pull your feet out, then you put your feet on top of your shoes so you can run off of transition, because it's asphalt. So you don't want to be in like road cleats basically on the smooth surface, so you can fall. So I reached down and I'm unclipping. I unclipped I pulled my left foot out of the shoe, fine. And then I was doing the right foot, and because I'm on a downhill, I'm coming in way too hot. So like an idiot, I have my right hand is on my right shoe, and I hit my brake with my left hand, and I freaking squeezed it. And I mean,
and that's your front tire, right?
What's that?
Is that your front tire?
It's a front brake. I mean, it looked like I got shot by a shotgun. I wish there was video of it. I'm usually really good at rolling through falls, just years of football and wrestling. I'm really good at that. I mean, I slammed my head and my hip. And I mean, just like, it was the only time that I've ever been really injured on a bike wreck. And so I just laid there probably for 30 seconds, just staring at the sky. And there was all these people around me, you know, sort of waiting. And I lifted my head and looked. My bike was like 40 feet away. My shoes were everywhere. And so I'm like, well, shit, I'm done with the bike, right? I mean, I'm basically at transition now. So I hop up and I can kind of walk. So I start walking, you know, I go to get my bike, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't think I broke anything. My hip was just, you know, really sore. So I ended up doing the run anyway. Wow. And then I had to get on a plane to China 2 hours later. So I had to like pack my bike and everything. And then as I crossed the finish line, I had to hit the hotel right away and then sit on an airplane to China. And I couldn't walk my right leg wouldn't go past my midline. That makes sense. So like I looked like a bride, you know, like I would like take this half step everywhere through China, walking through China. I looked like an idiot. Yeah.
Tales of adventure, something you would have never had if you stayed home on your couch.
Oh my God. I mean, every race, right? It's just that whole experience, I don't know, the number, I think it's more like the people that I've met over the years, you know, that I don't know, like watching sunrises over start lines, you know, especially at triathlons when you're on the water, and, you know, like the national anthem. How often do you hear the national anthem anymore?
My favorite part of the race.
Hearing the national anthem being sung at a sunrise over a lake, like, holy shit, that's worth the price of admission every single time.
Absolutely.
Every time.
I
wish I had more fun, like dumb stories, but you know, I think I've had a fairly vanilla existence in racing, you know. I mean, like, other than, again, like you're on top of Mosquito at Leadville thinking to yourself, how in the hell did I get here? This is amazing. You know, and you're sitting there taking a selfie with Ken Klober, the founder of Leadville, looking out at Mount Massive over Turquoise Lake, going, man, this is It just does not get better than this.
Well, it's good decision making, and that's why we're doing this, is trying to get people to make some of those decisions for themselves too. Life can be spectacular if we
That's it.
step out of our box. So, Troy, you've recently retired from the business that you built, and you're moving forward. What's next?
Well, so I'm working on a couple of things right now. I'm helping a buddy whom I've wanted to work with for years. And so he has the best way to describe it is a coaching. It's a video coaching analysis tool that I'm just helping him with some software, really just kind of staying busy and really my biggest pursuit right now is I just got a new mountain bike last Friday. Got a new Canyon Exceed hardtail. So I'm going to be doing a lot of mountain biking here. I'm actually going to go out right after this and ride some trails. But and then there is another pursuit that I've been trying to put together for a while that is about to take flight in a couple of weeks that maybe you can have me on later and we can talk about that. It's in the healthy living space, not endurance.
Okay.
So it gives me some distance between again, all of my pursuits, but yeah, there's some hints in the podcast if you've listened to the Athlinks podcast and some of the previous guests. So,
well, welcome to the healthy living sphere, because it's wonderful, and you're obviously someone who has a lot to contribute. So, everyone out there who's working to help people live better and longer, I support. And then your podcast is fantastic. So it was the Athlinks podcast, but you may rename it.
Indeed. Yeah. I appreciate that. And you were a fantastic guest. So the Athlinks podcast, again, it's the stories behind the results. It's really just kind of a continuation of the types of conversations that frankly we have in the break room and these days on the Slack channels at Athlinks. I will continue doing that. So I'm no longer an employee of Athlinks. I don't work on Athlinks anymore, but I am working on the Athlinks podcast going forward. So the idea, and I'd love your guests help with this because I've been fruitless in my pursuit to rename the podcast. So it'll be something by Athlinks or presented by Athlinks or something along those lines. So Athlinks will remain a title sponsor and that, but I'm having the most difficult time renaming the podcast. So I haven't come up with a good name. The best one I'm embarrassed to say, but it was Troy Meets World. Which as a play on Boy Meets Girl and Boy Meets World, whatever that show was, which is a little bit younger than me, but the millennials that I've talked to are like, you cannot name it that. That is the dumbest name I've ever heard. So,
all right, well, I'm clearly dumb because I thought it was cute.
I thought I liked it, and I thought it suited sort of what the pursuit of the podcast was. I'm meeting people in the world and having these conversations with them. So I liked it, but I don't know, we'll see. So yeah, if anybody has any good ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, use the comments section. So this interview is not only live, but it will live forever on these channels where it was published: LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, etc. So leave your comments. It's never too late. Troy needs help.
I need help.
As we wrap things up, where can people find you now?
Just like Instagram is at Troy Busot. It's Busot. That's probably the best place to find me. I'm on Twitter, but I don't ever tweet. It's kind of a
smart. Yeah,
I like positive things in my life, and I don't see a whole lot of positive stuff on Twitter ever.
Got a little tricky lately, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's I don't like seeking out outrage. I really do really love. I mentioned you and I were talking before we got on. I grew up in Phoenix, which is a very Midwestern town, oddly. It was settled by Minnesotans and Michiganers and Wisconsiners. And so it's just a very friendly place to grow up. And so I like the idea of seeking out outrage has always been really counterintuitive to me. Like, I don't get it. So I like to surround myself with positive, good vibes.
Yeah, the cancel culture is completely opposite to who we are and what we do. Evolve. Yeah. I dare you.
Well, and frankly, I just don't care that much about what people think about certain things, like growing up, people my age, like you just didn't like, I never knew what my grandparents' politics were, or much less my friends, and certainly not people I'd never met before. Like, people were just pretty apolitical. And now it's like to graduate kindergarten, you have to profess some political ideology. It's just, let's just quit talking about politics.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If anyone had a camera back at you between the ages of 15 and 18, would they cancel you permanently based on?
Oh my God. Yeah, I never would have gotten off the ground. I mean, and the funny thing, that's a great point that you bring up, because, so I grew up and I had these two sort of competing alter egos. On one hand, I was an athlete, and then the other, I played guitar from the time I was in 5th grade. And so I graduated high school. I grew my hair out, I started smoking. I played out in bands, and totally different lifestyle. And then I came back to it after that, and sort of cleaned things up, and made tons of bad decisions in my life, and horrible moves. And there was no camera at the time, and there was no platform for me to go and pontificate all of, life's solutions to every problem that I had no freaking idea what I was talking about. So
No,
yeah, there was grace built into our lives back then, because there was, the world had no memory at the time.
yeah, there's no
So
grace
yeah.
there. It's all fury.
Yeah. And so, I mean, even like, you were allowed to make mistakes, you were allowed to get into some trouble, and it wouldn't end your life. And unfortunately, our children these days are growing up where everything has this massive consequence, and it just breaks my heart. Like, my kids are not allowed to make just fundamental dumb moves. I got suspended for writing some awful things in a yearbook. I got suspended. I was allowed to walk. This is junior high. This is my 8th grade graduation. I was allowed to walk. I will never say what I wrote in this girl's yearbook. It was awful. It was so, I to this day, I don't know what possessed me to write it, other than like some of my older brother's friends had done the same thing, and they were in high school, and just, crude jokes kind of thing. And I only meant this as a joke. But then I came to school the next morning, and, got called down to the office. Her parents were sitting there with her. My mom was there. My mom's crying. I mean, I was so embarrassed by it. And it was great, because it was a great lesson to learn early that, but the consequence didn't exist outside of that room that day. I paid my penance, and then it was over. Like, there was no long-term record of it. So,
Great. Thinking is no question. Have you ever gone back to some of the kids you might have been mean to and apologized? Because I've had that opportunity since the existence of Facebook. I was a bit of a jerk here and there, and I was able to go back and say, I'm so sorry that I wasn't always kind.
it's interesting. Honestly, I don't remember, like, I was never a bully. I was never, I guess, big enough to be a bully. I think I was I've always had this kind of like arrogant aloofness about me, I think, and a very irreverent, acerbic wit. And the funniest thing happened at, I think it was like my 20th high school reunion, where this person was like, well, two things happened. One, this one guy was like, "You have no idea who I am at all, do you?" And I said, "You're so and so. I remember, like, I've known you since 5th grade. What in the world are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, you never talked to me in high school." I'm like, "You never talked to me in high school. Like, what? Why was it my responsibility to talk to you? Like, I was never mean to you. We just never, he was in the band, I was in football and other things. Like, we just never crossed paths." But he had it in his mind that I didn't talk to him. I promise I would have. And then this other person said the same, very similar thing of just like, "Oh, you never talked to me in high school." I'm like, "You never talked to me. Like, why? Are you really holding this grudge?" Like 20, I don't know. So I don't know that I've ever, I have definitely apologized for specific dumb things that I've done to people because of that, but it was never like a peer group versus other peer group or type of thing. Like, I grew up in I was very, very fortunate that by the time I was in high school, some weird magical reason, like, cliques didn't really exist. Like, all the athletes and the skaters and the stoner, we all hung out together. We were all friends. And so there was and I know that before me, so my brother's 2 years older than me. And then I had a step brother who was a year older than that. and they all went to the same high school, and it was very segmented. It was the kickers and the stoners, and
Oh boy. Okay.
everybody was like, you did not cross lines.
All right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a very similar experience. We just kind of were all mished together, and very diverse as far as racially and religions. It's South Florida, so it was just like the world commented on our town, and there we were, and we were all friends. There were little sectional pods, but everyone got along. It's interesting with, you have kids too, and it's funny. My daughter doesn't know any strangers, and my mom used to tell me, she used to say, "Stop being so friendly. You're going to get yourself killed." I said hi to everybody. She's like, "Stop saying hi." And I look at Ginger. She says hi, and I get it. She's warm and actually cares about people. And my son is a decent guy too, but he's like you. He's quiet, reserved, and he doesn't go around saying hi. So I tell him, I'm like, "Parker, if you don't say hi, people are going to think you're a jerk or aloof." And he's tall and handsome, which is sometimes a bad thing, I guess. People are going to think you're stuck up if you don't just say hi. So it's weird trying to manage those high school.
I mean, it's so funny to, like, I don't know how many younger listeners you have, but I think it goes for everything. Is like a good thing is talking to pro endurance athletes and how nervous and scared they get before a race. And it's the same type of thing. Like, we all go through it. Nobody's out there just, just without a care in the world. Very few people. I think there are some. There was actually a great fight about a year ago. Darren Till fought a guy he's a MMA fighter, and he talked about after the fight, he said, "Oh, I was so scared. This guy's from Liverpool. It's just such a great accent. I won't try it." But he was just talking about how scared he was. And he's like, before the fight, I was thinking about like ways I could like fake an injury and not have to fight. This is a freaking guy who has fought for the title. I mean, top of his game. We all go through it. We all have insecurities and what is it, imposter syndrome and all of those things. And so to think the other person is not, again, and this is where it comes down to, like, you have to offer grace. You have to offer grace to these other people, because we're all faking it half the time.
Absolutely. So we actually started off talking about MMA and UFC when we started this podcast. And back when I was fighting, that was the thing. I was so excited to get in the ring. I worked my tail off. I love my sport, but it was that time frame between leaving my dressing room and walking into the ring. They're like, "Okay, Fitz, you're up." And I'd be walking, and the announcer would be like, "And in the blue corner, here comes Fitz." And I'd be walking, and the whole time, that's when anxiety kicked in, and all I could think was, "Feet, go the other way." What's wrong with you? Just don't stop betraying me. Go the other way. And, that kind of anxiety built until the bell rang, and then ding, ding, I got to be a happy athlete again. But I took that stressful situation, and I kept going from elite fighter to elite fighter. So back then it was Kung Lee, it was Bill, Superfoot Wallace. There were the Gracie brothers. There was all of these interesting athletes that I had exposure to. And I would say, how do you manage that, pre-fight stress between the dressing room and the ring? That's all I need to know. And to a T, not one of them said they figured it out. They all said, no, I get that too. And I may look stern and tough and like I'm going to kill you, but in my mind, I'm having a heart attack. And that's kind of relative. That relative to a professional, for a job or negotiating a deal, or of course, sometimes we get 25,000 athletes at the start line, and I think they're all feeling a little bit of that. But that's why this finish line means so much. Is you got through it. You got through that fear and terror, and you moved forward.
Yeah, I've interviewed a couple of stand-up comics who are now endurance athletes on the podcast, and that's one of the things that they both had in common, is that once you've stood on stage and tried to come up with a comedy routine and bombed and dealt with that, everything else in life becomes very easy, And so like in your sport, in kickboxing, like we all get nervous. I don't know how nervous I necessarily get before a race. It's more about, again, like when you're in an open water swim situation, you just want to quit. You're just like, this is fucking miserable. Like, why did I do this to myself again? But like, think about that relativeness of, like, you're about to get kicked in the face, right?
Hopefully
not. Even if you win, you're probably getting kicked in the face at least once. You're certainly getting punched in the face. And it starts to make other things look a lot simpler, you know, like
Go on. Sorry.
running a 5K, like you might lose. And so like, I think back to my wrestling days, I was always like, I had that sort of fear of, I, I never understand the difference between fear of failure and fear of success. I was more worried about the L column going up one, getting a loss than losing, if that makes sense. This isn't like, you're not going to get hurt. I mean, you could get hurt in wrestling, but I never did, you know, so you're afraid of it's your ego that's afraid. It's not your brain or your heart. It's pure ego. It's just that you've been bested, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually interesting to me how most people are held back by just the fear of rejection. They're afraid to ask. They're afraid of hearing that word, that little word, no.
Yeah.
And so I used to fear that. And my attitude now is if it doesn't incur bleeding, bruising, or broken bones, I'm going for it. And okay, if you tell me no, I'll
Yeah, and your experience, you know, going through chemo and facing death and having to have that conversation with your husband and your children, and man, again, it's all relative. Like what's ever going to be harder than that? You know, there's only one thing that might be harder, you know.
Yeah.
And we all go through that at some point. You know, we will all have to say goodbye at some point. You've been through the hard stuff. Like if you call a race and say, "Hey, I would love to announce your race," and they say, "No, Fitz, thanks, but no thanks." It's like, all right, well, that wasn't so tough.
Dang it. Moving on. Yeah.
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 You know, who cares? It's
Yeah.
all ego.
Well, thank goodness we have a little bit of ego. It encourages us to work really, really hard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You just have to understand. Again, I think it's just like being nervous, right? It's not to say that you can't be nervous. It's how to recognize it and how to get through that. And it's the same thing about ego. It's not to say that we don't have ego. It's understand when something is ego driven and then deal with that appropriately.
Now, your new projects that we're not allowed to know about, are you a little bit nervous there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's luckily one of the skills I think I'm really good at building great teams around me. Like if we get to a point where I'm the smartest guy in the room, we're in trouble. We're going down. So I like surrounding myself with some really smart, good, talented people. And so this situation will be that first step is to sort of build a great team around me. And so luckily over my years, I've amassed some people that I can call on to do that. So, but yeah, it's really interesting. It's a very noble pursuit that I'm embarking on. So I'm excited if it's something that can, again, change the world. You know, it's tough when you've touched millions of people to go in a different direction. So this is a situation that will also sort of touch, you know, thousands and then millions of people and I think make the world a better place. So I'm excited about it.
I'm rooting for you. I'm very excited. I can't wait for the big reveal. And anyone can support you with that effort, let me know.
Cool. I will definitely call on you, and I appreciate the offer.
Of course. All right, Troy. So I'm going to let you go get on your bike and have your big adventure today. Thank you so much for being a very fun and interesting, engaging guest. I knew you'd be fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being you and having this podcast. So I appreciate it.
Of course. And for those of you who haven't done so yet, follow Troy on Instagram. You can follow me over there at Fitzness on all platforms. And if you have any questions or suggestions for great guests moving forward, lay them on me. And if you have any suggestions for names of Troy's podcast, use the comment section. I'll make sure he gets them. All right.
That'd be great.
Bye.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.